Hello and welcome to Books from Your Therapist, a podcast where we talk to therapists and mental health practitioners about their mental health related book recommendations. By mixing book talk with mental health, we hope to open up the conversation around books your therapist may have suggested and make them more accessible.
This podcast is not a substitute for mental health care. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm Amanda Throckmorton, a marriage and family therapist in California.
And I'm Tara Kremen, and I work in the book industry in Toronto, in Canada. This month, we're talking with therapist and author Dr. Han Ren about her debut book, The Hyphenated Life, Bridging the In-Between Spaces of Intersectional Identities. To pair with this, we also discuss Stephanie Foo's book, What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma.
Dr. Ren's book, The Hyphenated Life, is a powerful exploration of what it means to live between cultures, identities, and expectations. Together, we unpack the concept of being a hyphenate, the nuances of code switching and masking, and what it really looks like to break generational cycles.
Powerful, enlightening, and hopeful, What My Bones Know is a brave narrative that reckons with the hold of the past over the present, the mind over the body, and examines one woman's ability to reclaim agency over her trauma.
It was a really great conversation connecting with Han and talking about her newly released book and what it means to be a hyphenate. We look at Stephanie's book and learn the differences between PTSD and CPTSD. So keep that in mind. We do talk a little bit about trauma, so take care of yourself. So, hi, Han. Welcome to Books from Your Therapist.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We would love to just get started with a little bit of an intro about yourself. Like, who are you, your name, pronouns, licensure, anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Han Ren. My pronouns are she, they. I'm a licensed psychologist based out of Austin, Texas. I co-lead a group private practice here called Pivot Psychology, and I specialize in children of immigrants, complex trauma, anti-oppressive care, and more colloquially, overthinking overachievers, because that is what most people walk into my doors with.
And we were just speaking a little bit prior to recording. You also do a lot of continuing ed and trainings, and I've heard of you in different spaces prior to us connecting this way. So really excited to have you. Thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
What inspired you to become a therapist?
You know, it's so funny because when you are early in training, people ask you that. It's like, well, I want to help people and I want
Yeah.
to work with children and touch lives. And then, like, the more real and honest I've gotten with this question and with myself and with other therapists over the years, it's trauma. Trauma is what
Yeah.
led me to this route and probably what led most people to becoming a therapist, wanting to understand themselves and their families and their origin stories a little bit better and through a different lens.
Such a real answer. And I imagine depending on the audience, you get a different reaction to that answer. You shared a little bit of where you work. Are you in person there? Are you remote? Or what does your workday sort of look like?
Yeah, I do a bit of both. I'm a PsyPact licensed psychologist, so that means I can see people remotely through telehealth across like 40 states, which is really cool. But I also have a good amount of in-person sessions. It just feels a little bit different energetically to be in the same room as someone.
It sounds like you're sort of balancing a lot of different aspects of all this work. What does your week look like? Is it like a lot of client sessions and then
Mm,
extra work? I'm always curious about this because I find
yeah.
the longer I'm in this field, well, I mean, it's a whole side note, but I feel like it takes so much work to get licensed. And then there's always this sort of capitalistic thriving that you're feeling like, okay, and now I'm supposed to expand in this way, or that's sort of the
Yeah.
pressure there. So I'm always really curious how other folks handle that pressure and how they kind of figure out their weeks.
Yeah, so I see clients Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I don't see clients Mondays or Fridays, and those are my like admin days, my workshop days, my writing days when I was writing this book. I do content creation for social media as well, and those are also days where I will batch some of that. So it's a nice balance at this point where like a busy week for me is maybe like 13 to 15 clients, but on average I see maybe 10. And that's really nice because I have energy for them for the clinical work, but then also enough for like my own training and my own continuing ed and also the continuing ed that I provide for others.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that because I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of pressure to be seeing a certain amount of clients. And my experience, the longer I'm in this field, it's like reevaluating my energy and what actually feels good for me and, creates a week that feels doable as well as presence for my clients. So it's always interesting to hear how different folks manage their energy with that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think so many of us just want to get to that like 25 clients per week, full caseload when we first start. And that just doesn't feel really sustainable, especially
Yeah.
with the notes you got to do and the prep work. It just feels really energetically taxing to be sitting and holding for so many people, especially when the world is where it is these days.
Well, you mentioned your writing there, and we're going to be talking about your book today, which I'm always really excited when we're talking to a therapist that's written their book too. So I kind of want to know about your writing journey. Is this something that's new to you? Have you always written? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I've always expressed myself creatively somehow, right? Whether it's, poetry or writing or blogging or content creation. I've always felt this energy around being able to share my experiences. But writing a long form like this is new for me. This is definitely the first time I attempted to write a book. During this process, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'd rather write 3 dissertations than to write a book because you can be so academic and, just like tell in your dissertation. Whereas writing a book like this, you have to show and you have to,
Mhm.
be connecting and bring people into your world and be relatable. It was just a very different beast.
Yeah, I guess there's a bit of a separation when it's academic, but this book is very much like you are this book. So, how did you figure out that writing process? Like, you have it sectioned into parts that I think work really well. Did you know that beforehand, or was it kind of just led the more you were writing the book?
Yeah, I mean the proposal, I almost like pitched it as TikToks, right? There's gonna be like 30 short chapters. And then when I actually started writing, I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much more to say about every single one of these topics. So I had to really condense and restructure it as I went along. And I really thought about my clients and my own experiences, what tracks when it comes to the trajectory of how we figure these things out for ourselves. And this is how I came to like the part 1, 2, and 3 of this book.
I really like the idea that you're using the content creation first as inspiration. That's super interesting and not something that I've heard too much in my work with authors. So that's a great way of like pitching something if like you're first visualizing it and how the audience will receive it and then taking it into this more traditional format. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it was what I knew, it was what I was familiar with and what I knew worked for, this other medium.
Well, I'm excited to jump into it. And before we do, is there anything else that you'd like to share about yourself, either professionally or personally, before we get going?
I mean, there's so much more I could share. So yeah, let's see where this goes.
All right, perfect. Let's jump in then to your book, The Hyphenated Life by Dr. Han Ren. Congrats on the
Yeah,
release.
thank you.
Can you let us know what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, it's been brewing for so long. Started originally with the idea of how can there be more representation for children of immigrants and Asian Americans? And, as I was brewing on that, like other books that cover these topics came out that I appreciate and really respect and love the authors as well and the work that they did in capturing, the children of immigrants experience, the Asian American experience, and how that connects to mental health and identity. A lot of what I saw within my own clientele was even with children of immigrants or Asian Americans or, one aspect of identity, it still didn't capture the whole picture. And we all have different levels of assimilation and acculturation, different generational immigration statuses, and different just additional identities markers that we carry. And despite how different these were, there were just patterns that would show up around ways that people would try to find their tribe, find their belonging. And, when we are earlier in that journey of trying to find where our space is, there's a set of just I guess, behaviors or performances that we adopt as part of that choreography of like trying things on. And that's sort of what led to this book was like, okay, can we capture the different survival strategies that people use when they try to find where they belong? And, the ways that this can really connect to people across identity markers.
I like how you name some of these things as performance and survival skills, right? I was really struck by the way you shared your own experience in this book alongside what you've experienced clinically. And, what's the saying? It's like you need to like write the book that you feel like is missing, right, from this discussion. And I'm so excited for this release and for this to be available. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of the book?
Yeah. So when I think about, what is a hyphenate and what is this hyphenated experience, when people have multiple identities, we shapeshift in different spaces. Wherever space we occupy, we like, perform what is expected of us in that space. And sometimes when we're really focused on what the external world demands of us, we lose our own guideposts of like, who are we when we are by ourselves, or who are we when we don't have to perform? So I really think of a hyphenate as someone who is straddling these different worlds, but like not interested in just completely assimilating to one domain or another. People who want to be able to bring their authenticity to these spaces and have a through line that connects themselves to themselves, even though they're trying to find fitting in or belonging across these different worlds. And so I felt that it was almost like a rebellion nature of it, of just like, yeah, I'm all of these things and I can like survive and perform to find safety, but who I am is beyond just what any one of these domains expects of me.
I love that this is where you're going with this because I feel like we are seeing the idea of parts work really popular right now. And we just had Andrea Gutierrez Glick on a couple months ago, and we talk a lot about parts work with her. And I think you can be therapy world adjacent and have heard of IFS at this point. And so I love this normalization of moving into and letting certain parts lead us and having compassion for how we show up in different spaces. So I feel like this work is really extending kind of the understanding of what parts work. And we're hearing that sort of everywhere. So yeah, it feels like the timing of this is really great.
Yeah, yeah, we're complicated. We're complex beings.
Totally. Your book speaks a lot to the hyphenated immigrant experience, and you write about the difference between like code switching and masking in everyday life. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So, I really think about code switching and masking as kind of morally neutral behaviors that we all do to some extent. And code switching is really borrowed from the African American community with AVE and the way that people will change their language depending on their audience. And I think about that being more of like, okay, you have different languages that you're fluent in, and wherever you are, you speak the dominant vernacular. Whereas masking comes from like the neurodivergence autism community, where you kind of put on this facade where you have to perform elements of what the world expects of you. And masking maybe takes a little bit more of a toll on you energetically, but it's also a survival strategy. And we all do both depending on where we are. But code switching is like, okay, these are just natural parts of me, and I'm going to, put this one forward or that one forward because that's where I am right now. Whereas masking is like, okay, what is this environment expecting of me? And how do I conform to it? Because that is what I need to do in order to stay safe.
Yeah, I like the explicit naming and the differences. And even as you're talking, I could feel like a little bit of an energetic switch of what that might feel like for someone in each sort of scenario. And I think giving language to these things is so important.
Yeah. And, even when I started writing this book, it was like, the authenticity or the pressure for authenticity was so great. Like, be yourself no matter what. And then, a lot changed in our world through the process of writing this book. And I speak to it,
Mm.
even in my author's note about how society is not as accepting, as maybe less safe for people who inhabit the margins. And so then it's not like one is better or worse than the other. They're both just survival strategies that we all need to do sometimes. And we all got to do what we got to do.
I feel like this question is maybe like a giant question, but just something that jumped up to me because we, for another episode, had read Decolonizing Therapy, and you speak about decolonizing your mental health. And I was just wondering if you could tell us what that means to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much aligned with Dr. Mullen's framework of decolonizing therapy, where you kind of grab treatments at the roots, right? You understand the etiology of like how traditional Western mental health treatments came to be and what fits and what doesn't. And it's really understanding that so much of healing and spirit is spiritual work. It's not just like this like sanitized Western idea. It's ancestral work. It's been deeply rooted across communities for generations way before traditional psychotherapy came onto the scene. And so it's paying homage and respect to the lineage of what healing can look like beyond just our limited Eurocentric framework of it. And it's really honoring complementary interventions that maybe psychotherapy would call like woo woo or not evidence based or whatever, because all of that is also always in flux. It's recognizing that once you start pulling the threads of one thing, like the whole tapestry comes apart because everything is made up in some degree. And yes, science is real and like, evidence-based matters. And who did the study based on which population and what are the motives of upholding some modalities over others. Like all of these can coexist in kind of a more critical frame of how we approach healing.
Cycle breaking is something that you write about, and it's a common term, often maybe talked about in the context of parenting or breaking cycles with your parent. And in your book, you write, we break cycles through understanding our own relational programming, practicing self regulation and co regulation, deconstructing harmful internalized isms, and modeling intentional and reciprocal ways of engaging with our communities and ourselves. So, could you speak a little bit about this and the different ways that somebody could maybe try and disrupt some cycles that they're experiencing?
Traditionally, we think of cycle breaking as just with your own children, which is great and very appropriate. But also, even if you never have children, you still have a sphere of influence. You still have community and people who respect you and look up to you, and you become a mentor, role model. And how you treat yourself extends to how you treat the people around you. And so, even if you are a loner and you don't necessarily have like a lot of community, how you relate to your own inner voice and your inner process can also be a process of cycle breaking, because so much of the time we repeat what's been fed to us, what's been modeled, and our inner voice did not start with us. It started with somebody else telling me these things externally. So cycle breaking is just being really conscientious of, where did I learn this? How did it help me or serve me then? And does it still serve me now? And if not, how can I be really intentional about replacing some of the elements that no longer serve me with something that is less harmful or more nourishing or more rooted in my current values? And I really think about cycle breaking as being just observant, more than anything else, because we can't change what we're not noticing. And so many of these things are just so micro and nuanced. And it comes through in just being able to identify, like, oh, I did that thing, and that's actually not how I relate to the world anymore. That's outdated, and I can shift it next time.
This piece really stood out to me because, like we named earlier, a lot of times it's talked about in the context of parenting. And I love that you listed different ways of how to do this in the book, and even coming it back to just simply noticing, right? Because I think sometimes when I read books, you're taking in a lot of information. And sometimes I would just love a simple way to, like, what can I take away from this section that actually feels doable? And it's like, yeah, I can notice the way I respond in this situation and recognize that there's a difference in myself now and how I would have responded. And also, I can take a moment and be intentional in how I do this. I thought this was such a great section because, like we said, a lot of times it's just so focused on parenting. And for the folks that maybe do not have children or want to do this work on their own, even within themselves, or, it's like, there's an option for you to do that. In addition to that, you talk about the stages of healing, which is name it to tame it, grieve it to leave it, feel it to heal it, which I love. It's like, yes, I can take away this too. Can you speak a little bit more about these?
I think about this as like kind of being progressively deeper. Like there's these layers of healing. And the first one really is just name it to tame it because we have to, put together your trauma timeline and understanding like this is what happened and just being able to name both the harms and the glories of what made up your life. There's like kind of a lot of narrative therapy in that stage of just identifying and like, giving words to emotions and just having the psychoed of this is what it means to be psychologically minded about your life. But if you stay there, then you're just intellectualizing, you're analyzing, you're rationalizing, and you're not going deeper to actually change how you experience it. So the next level is feel it to heal it, where you really just whatever is activated within your body, like you learn how to let that feeling, flow to completion. And you really develop the skills of, okay, I can just like be, I can experience my emotions. They're maybe scary or big, but they're neither good nor bad. And, the more I resist it, the longer they're going to last and the more they're going to come out sideways. So really being able to actually work with, feel and be with the experience of all of your emotions. Because I find that, it's not just the hard, bad ones, quote unquote, bad ones, right? Anger, sadness, the ones that people typically label as bad. It's not just those that people struggle with. People also really struggle with like the expansiveness of joy and receiving love and really being able to celebrate the good. So that stage is really like, okay, let's just be present and feel. And then once we have that experience, we're still going to be triggered by going through our lives, especially if we do have early childhood trauma. The new things that happen to us, especially relationally, are going to like send us down this emotional flashback. And I think of this as like a shoots and ladders game. Sometimes you step on a chute and then you're just like transported to an earlier stage of your development. And even though the catalyst was like irritating, your reaction is outsized to like what triggered it. So that's the grieve it to leave it phase where, okay, you know the story and you felt the feelings and you just need to grieve what happened then in order to get out of that chute and get out of that pit of shame or emotional flashback or wherever you are. And I find that that work extends to the rest of our lives because no matter how much healing we do, there's always going to be more in life that will send us back into this regressive space. And that's just part of it.
This is so important to have written out so clearly because, in my experience, people really get kind of lost in the sauce and the sort of the naming it stage, right? Where it's like, because we're so cut off from our bodies, right? It's like, yes, I can stay and intellectualize this all day and use every minute of therapy just for this story without actually accessing the body. And it is an ongoing process, right? And I love the shoots and ladders visual. I'm actually picturing the board game and just like, oh no, the glass breaks and then you fall down, right? Like there's glass on the floor, right? It's such a perfect way to kind of describe the ongoing work in it. And it's like with time, maybe you start to notice your big reaction time has shortened, right? And it's like, that's the healing, right? Like that's the healing
Yeah.
we're looking for. Wow, I would have been reactive and triggered and big about this for 20 minutes. And now I realize it's 11 minutes, right? Like that, I think that piece sometimes gets overlooked is this expectation. Like once you've kind of named it and felt it, that it's now fully integrated and you can move forward in this really like, I don't know, ideal way. But it's like, oh, how human of you to have triggers and kind of being brought back into that space. So I really loved this section because I was like, this is such a good, understandable takeaway that anyone can apply and help them understand the process that they can be in.
Yeah, I really wanted to normalize that. Yeah, it's forever, right? You're never
Yeah.
done. But that doesn't mean that, oh, I gotta like keep hitting it hard and like healing is my job, right? Like you get to just be and let it unfold and take the reps as they come. You don't have to manufacture it.
Totally. Yeah, no, I reading this is so happy to see it written out so clearly. And just like, I can imagine this piece being very helpful for folks being like, oh, okay, I don't have to be superhuman. I don't have to be this evolved being that now feels very clear of everything.
I think my favorite part of your book, which, as the hyphenated life, you're bridging the in-between spaces. And then your chapters end with a section that's about finding your space in between, where you ask questions of the reader that encourage them to do, think, and feel. And can you tell us why you felt it was important to include these? Because I thought the questions they were so gently nudging and so accessible, I think, without being like, sometimes when as the non-therapist, they can be very challenging and you kind of just you have to be in the mood to do the work. But I found that splitting it like that made it much more accessible. So thank you. And I'm just wondering if you wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, I really wrote this for the lay person. It doesn't go into like deep therapeutic theories or anything. And I think about people who can't access therapy, or they go and access therapy in like one way, whether it's like just somatically or like intellectually. And I wanted to give people just some different avenues to interact with what they read so it can sink in a little bit beyond just the intellectual level. And yeah, you don't have to really sit with these things. Just even considering it from different perspectives gives you a glimpse into like, okay, and then what would that feel like in my body? And how would it look if I were to engage with this part a little bit differently? And I think that's really where the magic happens in these like micro steps. We want sweeping change, we want catharsis, but that doesn't tend to stick. It's really just doing the micro reps over and over that breeds change.
And thanks for saying that because it doesn't feel as sexy as the big catharsis. Like it's like that's
No.
what we're wanting, the big wave
Breakthrough.
ocean, like breakthrough. Yeah, it just that doesn't stick to your point. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I work with people pretty long term too. And like,
Yeah.
when I started, I was like getting trained in these shorter term modalities that were like, okay, we're gonna do bilateral stimulation and this is gonna change everything, or psychedelics or whatever, like things that I felt could be the silver bullet. And I
Mm.
realized it doesn't matter what that thing is. If you're not practicing it, if you're not integrating and you're not giving yourself the opportunity to continuously reflect, nothing is going to stick because you didn't get here overnight. So it's going to take quite a while to undo it too.
I think that reflection piece is so important as well because it's difficult to see how far you've come, especially in these things when you're training your mind to sort of think differently over time. So yeah, it's good to reflect.
Yeah.
And, we live in a society where there's a lot of pressure to lean into the more dominant culture. So, for folks that might see themselves in the pages of your book, anyone that's struggling to navigate in the in between spaces, do you have any words of encouragement or advice?
Well, I say this repeatedly in this book, and I do think if you take one thing is you're always enough and never too much. I think that just is like, you get to relax a little bit because those descriptors is like based on whose standards and who does it benefit if you are, a certain way that's considered like enough or whatever, a lot, not too much, whatever. So I think that's just something that's like a grounding affirmation to come back to, because wherever you are, it makes sense for the life that you have lived and for the survival strategies that you had to cobble together. And can there be improvements to how you show up in a way that you feel more comfortable with? Sure. But if you're constantly trying to perform for external standards, you will always feel that this is too much or not enough, depending on someone else's standards. So I really feel the translation to what this looks like for each person is going to be so individually defined. And that's the beauty of it.
I love your book starts and finishes with that line, and I
Uh,
underlined it in both sections.
it's so good. It just gets to the heart of it in the most gentle way. And yeah, thank you for that.
And before we move on to your second book pick, I just wanted to give a shout out for the beautiful cover of your book. It's so lovely.
We love
Um,
it.
I
Thank
just think
you.
the gentle pastels and all the different pieces, I thought it just really suited the tone of your book so well.
Thank you. They did a great job with translating my vision.
So let's move on to the second book, which is the book of your
Mhm.
choosing, What My Bones Know by Stephanie Foo. Why did you pick this
Mhm.
book?
I loved this book. This was one that I felt in my bones and
Yeah.
then kept revisiting repeatedly over the years afterwards. I felt it was the first book that really captured complex trauma in this high functioning way. All the other books about complex trauma is like people who struggle with activities of daily life, who are, not able to take care of themselves or be in healthy long-term relationships. And I thought Stephanie did such an excellent job of weaving together how identity and pressure and expectations, especially with Asian American identity, immigrant expectation, model minority myth, it really looks different for our community. And this is why, like in my book, I write about how most of us probably have some complex trauma. It's different, degrees of severity, but like it is just so normalized. But just because it's normalized doesn't make it normal. And we get overlooked when it comes to literature or interventions because we are so high achieving and high performing. But so many of us feel hollow and empty and really sad inside. Because when you're chasing something and you're constantly looking to performance and external validation to tell you that you are enough, and you have this hole in your bucket, it's going to keep going through. So I thought that this book did such a great job of showcasing what that experience is like.
I thought it really paired well with the book that you've written. I was like, what an excellent like companion for us to read, speaking about these subjects overlapping it. But if we could roll back for anyone that hasn't read What My Bones Know, could you give listeners a little overview?
Yeah, it's a memoir of healing based on Stephanie's own life. And she is a child of immigrants, Asian American, who grew up in the Bay Area where there was a lot of Asian Americans, but a lot of high pressure, high achievement. And also, she herself went through just horrific trauma, abuse, and is no longer in contact with either of her parents. And it talks about her healing journey as an adult and trying out different therapeutic modalities, but also just the ways that she herself found compensation for this, hollowness inside through work and performance and achievement and trying to collect accolades based on the external gaze.
Yeah. And as you've mentioned, she writes about her experience as an immigrant and living with that hyphen among her others and her search for identity in a world where her parents like have not set her up well at all. And writing really, even from a younger age, seems to provide her with an escape and an identity. And so I'm just curious, like, why do you think that writing can be such a powerful tool when it comes to dealing with trauma?
Name it to tame it, right? It
Right.
is the first step, right? It's how you make sense of your experiences. You are able to put it to paper, you're able to capture moments of your life, but also really able to collect your thoughts and make sense of it through words. It's also what makes therapy effective. It's the power of just, speaking and finding the words for all the turmoil that's happening inside.
She covers her early life experience, which we've sort of shared. It was very difficult. And I think what's interesting is we get to, as a reader, we're kind of along for the journey when she gets her CPTSD diagnosis. And this is a diagnosis that isn't as commonly known outside of therapy circles. I'm curious if you could share the difference between PTSD and CPTSD.
We're familiar with PTSD as like big bad thing happened. We think of these as like big T traumas. They're, an assault, a natural disaster, a death, and there's things that can be encapsulated by like this single incident. Whereas complex trauma can have some, PTSD, like big single incidents that are interspersed, but the hallmark of complex trauma is emotional neglect. It is the lack of attunement and lack of consistent curiosity about your inner world when you are in those formative years of development as a child. So it's a lot harder to conceptualize it for a lot of people because they can look back at their life and say like, well, I wasn't beaten, I wasn't raped, like these big T traumas didn't happen, but I just don't remember my childhood as much. I don't know why I feel so hollow inside. Something must be like seriously wrong with me. And these acts of omission, the good things that should have happened but didn't happen, can be way more damaging because we tend to self-gaslight ourselves with like, well, we can't point to the bad things that happen, so maybe it's just not that bad and I'm overreacting. And that is also a hallmark of complex trauma survivors, is the tendency to minimize their experience and their pain.
Something that was so beautiful about the way that this was written was just how real it felt to watch someone go through their own journey of trying on different ways of healing, different therapy modalities. She uses humor in this way that just, I think, really encapsulates someone's experience trying to find either maybe early on the silver bullet, but also kind of learning to accept that all of this is kind of active work. To your point, the chutes and ladders analogy is sort of perfect to describe the way that she goes through her healing journey and how we get to see her doing all this healing work, but then experiencing a trigger with her partner and maybe sliding down that slide. I found this piece tied so well to your book and also such a relatable experience for many folks that are kind of on their own healing journey. Was there anything else you would want to share about this piece for her or how you see this show up for other clients?
Yeah, I mean, one through line that I felt so powerfully through her book was the power of relational healing, because she,
Mm.
develops this relationship with her partner, and then she finds kind of alternative role models and parenting figures, attachment figures with her partner's parents, and she learns to receive love. And even in the ways that she pursued healing, therapeutically or clinically, the ones that were more skills focused didn't quite land for her. The one that actually really stuck with her was a modern analytic therapist who, this is known as a relational therapist. It's longer term. It's a lot of shadow parts. It's a lot of cutting through the intellectualizing by being with and noticing and having the relational safety with someone to be able to highlight, call out, and process these defenses that show up for all of us. And so it really did speak to the power of relational healing, co-regulation, and how we need each other. We do as humans.
I always feel like the relationship is the most important part of a healing journey. Would you agree with that? Like, I know we're talking about all these different modalities and ways to work and things, but I always feel like the relationship is the most important. Is that something that aligns with your viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, as a long-term relational therapist, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I know we just kind of talked about how raw and realistic her journey was so amazing. And the way she writes about it feels so true to a lot of people's experiences. And another part that I thought connected well with yours was how sometimes healing is annoying. I thought it made me laugh because I was like, it is annoying sometimes, right? And so, do you have any advice for people that might feel stuck or are like feeling annoyed in their own healing process?
Oh, it's so normal, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like, if you're not irritated by yourself at some point, like, what are we even doing? But that's also part of it. It's like, I can love myself even though I like annoy the fuck out of myself. And each other, because everyone's annoying. That's just part of being human. And it's just, we kind of think like, well, when we're more healed, people will love us more, or we'll be accepted more by the people that we want to gain acceptance by. And we realize that's really not the case, because as you become more aligned to your own values and you become more true to yourself, you realize how people demand things from you that you are no longer willing to give. And so when you stop performing, when you stop auto accommodating for other people's expectations, some people who are going to be really pissed at you and treat you differently or punish you for it. And then you have to decide, is this worth it for me to, stay in line with myself, or do I want to continue catering to what they expect of me? And because of that, our relationships will change. You will lose some that wanted a different version of you that you have outgrown. You will also gain a lot who are appreciative of your honesty and this newer, more maybe settled version of you And you will develop different relationships that can have the lasting power of authenticity and just truth in seeing and celebrating who you are in this chapter.
Like almost another aspect of your hyphenated life because healing doesn't end, period. It's like, I know the hyphen is the wrong grammatical thing to include there, but you know what I mean? It keeps going. I was trying to tie it together.
Yeah, exactly.
It is an M dash, but yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, it kind of works, but just it doesn't, you're not healed, full stop. I listened to this memoir with the audiobook, and Stephanie narrates it, having, she works in the podcast field, so she narrated it so well. It was really heavy. I had to stop several times because it's hearing her stories it feels like so much more intimate when you're listening to it. And then I was kind of surprised when she goes into, when she does find that relational therapist and she includes the actual audio of the therapy sessions. So I was pleasantly surprised, but then I also felt like I was kind of eavesdropping. I was just wondering, like, what, for both of you as therapists, like, what were your thoughts about her including her actual therapy sessions?
So brave on everybody's part, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would clam up as a therapist. I would clam up as a client.
Yeah.
I really admire that.
I do too. Because the first time I read this was my second read of it. The first time I read it, I read the actual physical copy. And this time I did the audio. And I was like, I didn't know that this was a thing. Like, it was so exciting for me to hear because I think one piece about this book is she's kind of like pulling back the veil on what it might be like to go through a therapeutic process. I think it was stated in the book, like he was giving her permission
Oh,
to
totally.
use all this audio. I was like,
Yep.
to your point, so brave. And I've just felt so much gratitude for it because we don't often get to see the behind the curtain sort of look at someone's process. And I thought it was really special. I was like, wow, really in awe of both of them and everyone, because it makes me think about when you're training to be a therapist, oftentimes you'll bring in like recordings of your sessions to your consultation to get support as you're training. And it's like, I just remember the anxiety of having a small group listen, let alone the world. I was
Yeah.
just like, to your point, how brave.
Mhm.
So both books do cover some of these tender topics, but also I felt hopeful sort of finishing both books. And you identify sources of trauma and work to heal to create a fulfilling and happy life. What do you hope readers take away from these books, maybe together or individually?
Your past influences your present, but it doesn't define your future. We can't change what happened to us, and some things really should never have happened to anybody. Explanations are not excuses, nor do they excuse us of responsibility for our own life. We all have agency, no matter how small it is, no matter how deep we have to go searching for it. We can't control the future, but we have agency with what we do, with what we know right now, and that impacts the future and can give us a sense of safety and some semblance of control. I think that is really important and powerful for us to remember that we can change our own future in ways that our past selves could not have even imagined or fathomed. We always have that agency. And I want to give people the hope to discover that. Yes, we can have reasons for why our lives are like this, whether it's on the micro or macro level, right? Our individual personal trauma or like the systemic oppression trauma that we are all living through right now. And yet, blaming it on external sources is not a strategy nor an intervention. We all have agency to do something differently to make our lives 1% better.
Thank you. What a beautiful takeaway and just so well said. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about both of these books. Where can folks find you online? You've talked about sort of having an online presence. If folks are interested in connecting, like where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on TikTok and Instagram as Dr. Han Ren. And you can also find me on my website, drhanren.com, or my group practice website, pivotpsychologyatx.com.
Thanks for listening to Books from Your Therapist. If you're interested in the books we talked about, we'll include the links in our show notes. If you'd like to reach out to us with either your own recommendations or a mental health practitioner or author interested in coming on to share, you can email us at booksfromyourtherapist@gmail.com.
If you're in California and interested in working with Amanda, you can find her at amandathrockmorton.com. And you can find us on all of the socials. We are at Books From Your Therapist on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and Substack. And if you enjoy this podcast, let us know by leaving us a nice review.
Happy taking care of yourself within your own healing journey.
Happy seeing the optimistic side of healing and the annoying side, but mostly the optimistic side.